Trying to stop crime by fighting at the street level is like trying to stop a forest fire by clipping the leaves off trees. It can't be done. But that's the job of the cop on the beat, the detective in the precinct, the district attorney. The roots of crime and its causes are complex, but the cop is not supposed to be a sociologist. He's not supposed to be a lawyer. His job is to enforce the law, not question it or change it. This job was especially tough at the turn of the century. Immigrants flooded into the United States by the thousands, bringing with them their fears of the police and their fears of each other. Like the Black Hand, the proto-Mafia extortion group that plagued the Italian communities on the East Coast and in Chicago. Pay or die was the command from the Black Hand. Though every ethnic community had its gangs, they were seldom talked about outside the community. It wasn't until 1890 that the Mafia was made public in New Orleans. Police Chief David Hennessy was shot and killed when he threatened to expose them. 10 years later, President Theodore Roosevelt established a division of the government which would handle interstate and federal crimes. At the time, it was called the Bureau of Investigation. Later, it was redubbed the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But during the early teens and 20s, it was primarily used as a political tool against so-called anti-American activities. Anarchists and various foreigners who were thought by the Bureau and some elements of government to be a threat to the American way of life. It was not until J. Edgar Hoover joined the department and soon rose to the position of director that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was known as the nation's top crime-fighting organization. Hoover, with his bulldog face and the apparent manners of a courtly Southern gentleman, seemed to be perfect to have the job as the nation's top cop. With crime growing by leaps and bounds during the days of Prohibition, people yearned for a counterbalance, a force of law as strong as the lawlessness. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially fell under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. However, everyone understood that it was J. Edgar Hoover's department. Hoover instituted a systemized method of fighting crime. In the forefront of this system was the field agent. The FBI man became the image of the crime fighter. Despite other high-visibility crime fighters such as attorney Thomas Dewey, who fought the mob in New York, and FBI field agent Melvin Purvis, Hoover made sure that when the public thought of G-men, they thought of him.
Federal Bureau of Investigation is as close to you as your nearest telephone.
Gee, Mr. Hoover, your G-men sure are good. I'd like to be one when I grow up.
But if you work hard and play hard and live clean, you certainly be one.
Thank you.
G.
But John Edgar Hoover, a lifelong bachelor who lived with his mother, was never a policeman nor a lawyer. He was a bureaucrat, and he ran his department like one. In many ways, this worked well. The criminal files of the FBI were better than any other in the world, certainly larger. Working with local law enforcement agencies, FBI agents were often able to track down petty criminals, low-level gangsters, and psychopaths in record time. But Hoover always kept his eye on self-promotion and self-publicity, like these newsreel shots of half-witted kidnappers arrested by the FBI. Or this gag appearance in the late 30s, with comics Olsen and Johnson, fighter Gene Tunney, and Robert Ripley from Believe It or Not.
This is public enemy number one. Go on, open that door.
Not me.
Why not?
No, I refuse.
Well, why not?
Well, I've got a fellow that'll do it, though.
Yes, who is he?
Bob Ripley. Come on,
Me?
Bob.
Oh, no, you won't get me going there, believe it or not.
Yes, you will.
I certainly will not.
Why not?
I got a man who will do it, though.
Yes?
Yes. Gene Tunney will do it. You go, Gene.
Come on, Gene, open that door.
Don't be a coward. Come on. Now, wait a minute. Well, I don't know. I want you to...
Wait a minute. I've got a man. Come on, Joe.
Oh,
Kelly,
no,
open that
not
door.
me. No,
Come on, Joe,
not
open
me.
that door.
No.
Why not you?
Oh, have J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover.
All right, stand back. Now?
Now.
Come on, you rat!
Gag or not, the midget gangster was symbolic of the low-level loners Hoover used the FBI to hit. For reasons still unclear, Hoover concentrated his department's efforts on small violent gangs, like the Barker-Karpus gang, finally cornered in Florida.
G-men have been scouring the country, determined to wipe out the lust of the notorious Karpus-Barker gang. They've been on the Karpus trail many times, and they just missed him when they shot it out with the Barkers in Florida.
This is the 100-shot machine gun used by Ma Barker against a federal man in the raid.
Radio shows like The FBI in Peace and War, television shows like The FBI, and films like The FBI Story sang the praises of Hoover and the Bureau. The fictionalized character played by James Stewart in The FBI Story not only stood for all FBI agents, but was in fact an idealized version of Hoover. Like Hoover's own projection of himself publicly, this character was in on every major FBI raid.
This is a fellow named Chip Hardesty. To see him walking on a street, or in the familiar routines of a family man, or even in the daily pursuit of his job, you might not pick him out as something special. But there is something special about Chip Hardesty. So special, a whole big, tremendously exciting motion picture has been made about him, and men like him. So special, it has been given this proud and distinguished seal. This is the official shield of the FBI. Now, for the first time, you'll see the real, the authentic, the fascinating inside story of the FBI. Chip Hardesty was there from the very beginning. He was in Oklahoma when the Indians were being murdered out of their oil. He was in Chicago the night John Dillinger was finally cornered. He was there when the FBI closed in on some of the most dangerous public enemies in our history. He was equally at home in the dense jungles of South America as he was on a deadly spy chase through the caverns of New York. Chip Hardesty, whose far-flung adventures will amaze you, and whose love story will linger in your memory.
Bureau had nothing to do with what happened tonight. And you're not going to quit it. I didn't marry a ditch digger or a robin. I married you. And you're going to stay in the Bureau because good or bad, that's where you belong.
I'm taking over the surveillance from Silvano and moving south in Central Park. We're blocked in. Take over.
Hardesty.
Subject just left subway. Is walking west on 46th Street.
Tell NY 21, if and when Whitey passes the coin, arrest them.
Mike, would you gut those guns and get out of here? Now beat it!
He's got to get over the idea that every time I want to get into this house, I've got to outdraw it.
In point of fact, the FBI concentrated an overwhelming amount of effort on stolen cars. This fairly minor crime resulted in a high success rate. This looked good on paper, and Hoover could then go to Congress for larger appropriations to continue his apparently successful war on crime. The FBI did fingerprint felons by the thousands, and their files were used by every major law enforcement agency. But Hoover seemed far more interested in collecting information on influential people, senators, presidents, congressmen, and celebrities. He never hesitated to let these people know that he had files on them, nor to leak classified information to people he considered his friends, such as the corrupt, witch-hunting anti-communist senator, Joseph McCarthy.
Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
McCarthy.
Now, I just give this man's record.
Senator, may we not drop this? Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
You brought him down, did you not, to act as your assistant?
Mr. McCarthy, if there is a God in heaven, it will do neither you nor your cause any good. I will not discuss it further. You, Mr. Chairman, may, if you will, call the next witness.
J. Edgar Hoover was also an avowed racist, a Southern gentleman with all the negatives that contained. He saw the civil rights movement in general, and Dr. Martin Luther King in particular, as a threat to the America that Hoover loved.
This will be the defeat of everything that we've done for the last 12 months.
Hoover took an overwhelming interest in the sexual lives of movie stars and kept a naked picture of Marilyn Monroe framed in his hallway. Hoover also bet a great deal on horses. Recent revelations have indicated that J. Edgar Hoover may have in fact been either a homosexual and/or a transvestite, a cross-dresser. This may seem ludicrous, but if it were true, and if elements of organized crime knew this, and if Hoover knew they knew, that would account for the fact that Hoover, in 40 years as director of the FBI, never once admitted that there was such a thing as organized crime in the United States. Adding fuel to this speculation was Hoover's relationship with Clyde Tolson, a lifelong friend, also a bachelor, who frequently vacationed with J. Edgar Hoover. Like Hoover, Tolson had no background in law enforcement or the legal profession, but he was J. Edgar Hoover's closest friend. He was also virtual co-director of the FBI. When kidnapping became a federal crime after the Lindbergh Statute was enacted in the 30s, the FBI frequently became involved. But by then, kidnapping for profit by organized crime was passé. They realized that federal crime brought federal heat, and so they generally avoided it. By the late 1940s, most of America realized there was an organization in America that was virtually a second government. A Senate committee headed by Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee investigated the rackets in 1951. This was one of the first nationally broadcast live programs, and it had a tremendous cast of characters, including Frank Costello, one of the nation's top gangsters. Any doubts the viewing public might have had about there being organized crime in America were dispelled.
A bootlegger in 1922, later bringing liquor in and arranging to have it brought in from England, Canada. Is that correct?
No, it's incorrect.
On your testimony before, didn't you bring liquor in or cause it to be brought in from Canada and allude to it as your liquor at one of your gatherings? And didn't you sell it to people in this country?
I bought liquor and sold it, but I didn't directly myself.
And when you did that, you broke the laws and flouted the Constitution, did you not?
Well, you can call it that, yes.
You call it that?
Yes.
Do you realize, with me and all good citizens, that there can be no qualified allegiance to the Constitution of the United States?
Well, I wasn't the only one, sir.
I didn't ask you that.
Do you have any safe deposit boxes anywhere other than the box in your home?
No.
Do you have any places where you keep cash money, any place than the one box you have described in your home?
No.
Do you have any one who holds cash money for you?
That holds cash money for me?
Yes.
No.
Well, Mr. Costello, now the defense is...
Mr. Halley, with all due respect to the Senate, which I have an awful lot of respect for him, I'm not going to answer another question. You just said I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.
In just a minute, Mr. Wool.
Costello had shown extreme bravery and perhaps foolhardiness by testifying at all. He had broken the code of omerta, or silence, even though his testimony did not amount to very much. But he also made himself visible, a visible target for the Internal Revenue Service. They hit him for a huge amount of back taxes. Old-time mobster Frank Erickson was next up. bookie, ex-bootlegger, and a man with a criminal record that dated back to the 20s. Erickson, unlike Costello, had very little to say under oath. When asked what his line of work was, he had a vague reply.
We can't hear you, Mr. Erickson.
My business? I have no business. I'm in jail.
Were you a bookmaker?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that might tend to incriminate me.
Erickson, will you state any legitimate occupation in which you ever participated?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that might intend to incriminate me.
Joseph Dotto, alias Joe Adonis, was another racket king with his moment in the spotlight. This dapper don, who specialized in hijacking liquor shipments in the 30s and running gambling rackets throughout the 40s, denied that there was any such thing as the Mafia. Few people believe Joe's story, except maybe J. Edgar Hoover.
Previous appearance, the press has carried a release by this committee alleging that I am a member of a crime syndicate operating throughout the East and acting in conjunction with another crime syndicate in Chicago. The release also asserted that one Luciano sits in Italy as arbitrator of all disputes among various crime syndicates. It is further said that I am a member of an organization known as the Mafia, which controls crime on an interstate and national basis.
Joe Adonis's protestations of innocence rang a little hollow. He had been a member of the syndicate since its inception in the 30s, but even he spoke more than Chicago mobster Jake Greasy Thumb Gusick. As was his right under the Constitution, Jake Gusick continually refused to answer questions on the grounds that he might incriminate himself.
And it doesn't matter what the nature of the question is or what it relates to. Is that correct? All right.
Are you a resident of Chicago?
I refuse to answer that.
How long have you lived in Chicago?
I refuse to answer that. I want to remind you I claim the same privilege.
The invocations of the First and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution may indicate suspicious behavior, but legally they are not admissions of guilt. Clearly, the most talkative and glamorous witness at the Kefauver hearing was Virginia Hill. This backwoods beauty had been mistress to Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, and finally to Bugsy Siegel. She had allegedly fled the country when Ben Siegel was murdered because she had been lifting money earmarked for the Flamingo Hotel. Nervous at first, she soon warmed to the cameras and her inquisitors. She came off as a party girl, the Gangsters' Moll, brash, frequently unprintable, occasionally hilarious.
Well, I worked for a while. Then the men I was around that gave me things were not gangsters or racketeers or whatever you call these other people. The only time I ever got anything from them was going out and having fun and maybe a few presents. But I happened to go with other fellas. And years I've been going to Mexico. I went with fellas down there. And like a lot of girls, that they've given me things and bought me everything I want. Then when I was with Ben, he paid for everything.
By Ben, you mean Ben Siegel?
Yes.
Did you ever get any money from any other person whom we might call a gangster other than Siegel?
No.
Did you ever get any money from Costello?
No.
And did you ever get any money from Meyer Lansky?
I never got money from any of those fellas.
None of those fellas?
None of those fellas. None of these that I've been reading about, or none that I knew. They never gave me anything.
None of the Shetties?
No. I don't even speak to the... I mean, I met that Charlie once or twice. I don't even talk to him.
You don't like him?
No.
Virginia Hill perjured herself when she denied under oath that she had transported money from one city to the other. She had in fact acted as a mob courier for years. Virginia Hill's last years were full of depression and ultimately suicide. Though he dressed like a gangster, Tony Anastasia was officially president of the Longshoremen's Union, called to testify about the influence the rackets had in that union. His memory appeared to be slightly selective.
Anthony Anastasia.
And your address?
167 Union Street.
How long have you lived there?
About 11, 12 years.
What do you do for a living?
Longshoreman, stevedore.
How long have you been engaged in that?
Since I remember, sir.
Do you know a police officer named Winkleman of the Elizabeth Police?
Maybe if I see, sir.
Don't you know him by name, the man to whom I'm referring?
I can't recall, sir.
You said that you never had Theodore Narashef arrested. I'd like to ask you if he had you arrested.
I do believe so.
You do? What was the outcome of the case?
The case, I was on the front of the jury and I come out free.
Other witnesses told the story from the other side of the law. Men like William O'Dwyer, whose former job as DA for Kings County in New York was made extremely difficult by laws preventing the use of witnesses, who had also been part of a crime they were testifying against. O'Dwyer lobbied for a change in these laws so that unindicted co-conspirators could in fact testify against their fellow criminals.
Not convict any person of a crime on the unsupported testimony of a co-conspirator. Gentlemen, I'd like you to remember that, because that's a principle of law in this state that gave us a lot of trouble. That's a principle of law in this state that let Anastasia get away. Believe me, if we could have convicted any one of these people on the unsupported testimony of co-conspirators, we'd have been able to send every one of them. Certainly indict them.
Kefauver, the low-key senator from Kentucky, became the symbol of an executive crime fighter.
As matters now stand, I have a great conviction and a very firm belief that the people in local sections appreciate the conditions that are going on. They realize that what we have found in one city, it can be duplicated and usually exist in another city of the same population. The conditions we found in one area are usually the same conditions that can be found in another. So in the final analysis, it is the interest and the action of the local people that's going to whip organized crime in the country today. I believe they have been aroused. I think they know the facts, and I believe that the people, and not the Congress of the federal government, will do the job.
Boom, 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 boom.
Similar hearings into corruption and mob influence into the Teamsters Union cast young Robert Kennedy into the Kefauver role of executive crime fighter. The crosstalk between he and Teamster boss Jimmy Hoffa resembles a verbal boxing match.
I've said that enough around this country, and I want the American press to know that I resent the fact. And don't use this as a sounding board for headlines for that purpose. And I appeal to the chair that that be taken out of the record.
Hoffa had married his union to the mob years before. No-interest loans went south from the Teamsters Retirement Fund to mob investments.
Question whether or not after 3 years intensive investigation, Mr. Kennedy has anything concerning Jimmy Hoffa that isn't already public knowledge.
Had the jury treated you very well?
What?
Even if
What'd you say?
you say anything to him to the effect that juries treated you very well, and that you thought that you could do very well before a jury?
I know that's pretty ridiculous.
Did you say anything like that?
I did not.
Vito Genovese accidentally gave a great break to crime fighters in trying to make himself boss of bosses. After having Frank Costello nearly murdered, he assembled 100 Dons in Appalachian, New York. But a couple of sharp-eyed New York State cops saw the parade of limousines and the mob convention was rousted. Another break came in 1963, when low-level Mafia soldier Joseph Valachi decided to testify before Congress. Valachi had been a made man in the Cosa Nostra, but never a memorable figure. He was in fact a low-level soldier. In the decades that he was involved in the mob, he had been an enforcer, numbers runner, and narcotics peddler. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, headed by Senator John McClellan, first heard Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy had gone after corruption with the zeal and fury that he had shown while working with commie chaser Senator Joe McCarthy. so Kennedy's opponents were cynical. Kennedy himself had the bearing of an outraged choir boy. He had researched the subject of American crime thoroughly. After he had been appointed Attorney General, prosecutions of high-level mobsters had risen far beyond the level of the previous administration. Detractors pointed out that Kennedy's own father, Joseph Kennedy, had owned liquor companies in the 30s and had probably been a bootlegger before that. Perhaps it was the sins of the father that drove Bobby Kennedy onward. In any case, Joseph Valachi was Kennedy's prize witness. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, Valachi's testimony, his mere presence in the hearing rooms, verified what people had known for decades. The mob existed. It was part of American life. And like a bad dream, through Valachi's testimony, the nation relived the entire nightmare. The years of prohibition, of illegal drinking, a nation of criminals, a half-remembered dream of speakeasies and secret passages, of passwords and police raids, a decade and a half of bathtub booze and poison hooch, tales of corrupt cops busting low-level gangsters so the upper echelon could get away. Tales of hypocritical politicians, publicly denouncing liquor and privately absorbing it. Tales of murder, of sudden death, by the garrote, by the bullet, or by the ice pick. There were tales of one-way rides for guys who might squeal, of sirens in the night and shrieks in the dark. These were twice-told tales that people only knew from B-movies or The Untouchables on TV. But this time, the tales were told by someone who had been on the inside. Someone who murdered and sold dope. Someone who ran hooch and swore never to reveal the secrets of the society which ran a government within the United States government.
Yes, I am. What is the name? I was. What is the name of it? It is Cosa Nostra in Italian. Cosa Nostra in Italian. Our thing and our family in English. Our thing and our family in English.
The initial split of the two families in New York was relived. Joe the Boss's group on one side, the Maranzano group on the other. A large-scale diagram showed the family tree of the mob, power handed down from person to person. But many of the branches of this family tree were cut off short, cut off by the person just below them. Origins back to the Clutching Hand, Peter Morello, to the Masseria and Maranzano group, down to Luciano and Magnano, and Vito Genovese, Don Vittoni, currently serving his term in prison, but powerful nonetheless. The tale was retold of Don Vittoni's hit on Albert Anastasia, one of the founders of Murder Incorporated, a man who killed for the sheer pleasure of killing, a man who had once ordered a hit on a civilian simply because he had informed on a freelance bank robber named Willie Sutton. Anastasia's abrupt end had only been 6 years before Valachi's testimony in the barber shop of the Sheraton Hotel in New York. The memory was still vivid. Johnny Dio's name figured prominently in Joe Valachi's testimony. Dio ran tough interference for Valachi in the garment industry, allowing Valachi to run a cheap, non-union shop in the highly unionized garment industry. Johnny and his camera-shy brother Tommy were implicated in the acid blinding of a reporter trying to expose union rackets in 1956. But Valachi had nothing bad to say about the Dio brothers. They in fact had helped Valachi make so much money, he went into loan sharking. And if the borrower couldn't pay back the vigorish, the high interest rate, they might find their arm broken, just as a reminder to pay your bills on time. Valachi also admitted selling dope through the years. This was one of the most risky but most highly profitable enterprises the mob would get into. Very seldom would a high-ranking mobster like Waxy Gordon be busted for selling narcotics. But as the 50s became the 60s and the 70s, drugs became the wholesale item to import into the United States. Through the Senate testimony, the world learned why Joseph Valachi had decided to break the code of silence. While serving a 15-year stretch in a federal prison, Valachi realized that Vito Genovese, also in the same prison, had ordered him hit. Valachi killed an inmate named Jonh South, who apparently was the wrong man. Realizing his predicament, Valachi volunteered to testify against his former bosses.
That they were under orders from Genovese to kill you there in prison.
Yes, 100%, Senator.
100%.
Yes.
So when you saw Joe Beck, who you thought was Joe Beck in front of you,
Right.
you did what?
I hit him on the head with the pipe. And
a piece of iron pipe from the construction job there?
Well, yeah, they were building a new industry at this particular place of the yard, you know, near the end of the ball grandstand.
And you hit him with that pipe?
Yeah.
More than once?
About 3 times.
About 3 times?
Very hard.
Valachi's testimony continued for days, weeks, even months. He recounted how the mob had coolly and deliberately pushed drugs into Harlem and the inner cities across America. As callous and commercial a move as when the British had introduced opium to China in the 19th century. Then as now, the amount of dope that was seized and destroyed was a small fraction of what was imported. Then, as now, there were hundreds of tons of guns confiscated, destroyed, tossed into the river. But again, a small fraction of what was out there. Gambling went on in every city in America. Anywhere there was the mob, they got their cut. Banks were robbed, either by mob men or stringers, either to finance larger operations or simply to have a little walking around money. And these vast amounts of cash managed to subvert the legal system itself. Highly paid lawyers would appear immediately, pay bail, and get their criminal clients out of jail, get them off entirely while lesser criminals did time. Knowing Vito Genovese had a contract out on his head, Valachi knew his life could be snuffed at any moment.
How would you feel if you went back to prison?
I'll have to protect myself again, Senator. I'll have to kill or be killed again.
Would it be,
if you notice, Senator, I wouldn't say they'd kill me. I'll always fight back, Senator, if I go in prison.
Would it be fair to say that if you went back to prison that you'd be a dead man?
If they got at me, I wouldn't be in there 5 minutes, Senator.
Do you know if Vito had tried to kill any other people in jail? By poison or hanging?
There was people killed, but not in this particular time. They were killed, like, for instance, there was a witness against him in the Murder Incorporated. Do you remember that, Senator?
Yes.
There was a Peter LaTempa poisoned in prison.
Who was that?
Peter LaTempa.
What happened to him?
Well, they found him poisoned.
Poisoned?
In Raymond Street Jail, while he was there waiting to testify against Vito. And then there was another one, Abe Wells. He was also supposed to testify. He fell out the window.
Valachi knew very well what could happen to squealers. Abe Relis, Kid Twist, was going to testify to save his own life. Kept under armed guard in Coney Island's Half Moon Hotel, surrounded by police, he somehow leaped to his death several floors below. If the mob wanted to get you, they tried, hard. Valachi knew he was a marked man.
Tell us why, under these circumstances, you decided to cooperate with the Department of Justice and its agencies and with this committee.
The main question to that would be very simple. Number one, to destroy them.
To what?
Destroy them.
Destroy who?
The Cosa Nostra leaders, the bosses, the whole, how would you explain it? The whole thing that exists.
You want to destroy the whole syndicate, the whole organization.
That's right, yeah.
Why do you feel like it should be destroyed?
Well, through the years, first of all, I want revenge. Second of all, they've been very, very bad to the soldiers. And they've been thinking for themselves all through the years.
In other words,
all put together. I can put together a number of, so many things that it all comes to all one to destroy them.
There are just many reasons that add up to the fact you don't think that such an organization should be permitted to operate, to exist.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's right. As the senator put it before, what did I get out of it?
What'd you get out of it?
Nothing but misery. As you all understand, once you're in, you can't get out.
As you then are saying here today, after having given your testimony, you've got much more to give.
I'm asking
that you would like to see this organization, this Cosa Nostra, destroyed.
Yes, and I'll ask you again the same question. If you make such a law, I'll be a happy man.
Valachi came to realize that a soldier in this army, like in any army, is expendable, a pawn in the game. So he revealed the innermost secrets, the kiss of death, the kiss of respect, the initiation ritual, and the promise of silence or death. But the code of Omerta was only as strong as the people who took it chose to believe it was. And when they realized this was a one-way allegiance, that the mob owed no allegiance to the soldiers in the field that they thought they owed the mob, Valachi made the decision to save himself.
With a needle, makes a little blood come out. In other words, that's to express the blood relation. It's supposed to be like brothers.
That's the letting of blood.
That's right.
In other words, symbolic of the fact you're willing to spill your blood.
Right.
To give your blood, to give your life.
Yeah.
Is that what it meant?
Right.
All right, then what happened?
Then they all shake hands. Everybody gets up and shake hands. They say a few more words together, which I can't recall. They also said in Sicilian.
Well, did you know what they meant?
Well, I never asked what it meant. I never did ask what it meant, but it meant like sort of in the style of an organization or, in that style, but you don't bother. I didn't bother. I never did bother.
You never did what?
I never bothered to find out what it meant, but I had an idea what it meant.
Well, you had an idea. What was your idea?
All tied up. We're all tied up.
We're all together.
All together.
We're all together.
Right. Right.
We sink together, hang together, live together.
Yes.
That's what.
Senator, can I say something, Senator?
Yes.
As to what I'm telling you now, I need to go no further to say nothing else. This is what I'm telling you, what I'm exposing to you and the press and everybody. This is my doom. This is the promise I'm breaking that even if I talked, I should never talk about this, and I'm doing so. That's my best way to explain.
That is the highest oath you took.
Right.
In other words, that was the most sacred in this organization.
Right. I want
that you would never tell this.
Right.
New York crime buster John F. Shandley recounted the ruthless rise of Vito Genovese. From a teenage burglar to the murders of Joe the Boss in 1931, Willie Moretti in 1951, and Albert Anastasia in 1957.
In 1949,
at a dinner which was given by Frank Costello in a Copacabana. The manner in which Vito Genovese was treated when he came to the dinner gave every indication that he had emerged firmly as the top man in organized crime throughout the country.
Well, what date was that?
1949. This was a dinner that was given by Frank Costello for a very charitable organization, and it was very conspicuous. Vito was met at the door by Costello. He was ushered in. He was sat at the best place, and this spread through the city in no time that Vito had emerged.
The name of Vito Genovese was invoked like a litany throughout the hearings. But even as the Senate investigation continued, the case against Vito Genovese, the case that was keeping him in federal prison on a narcotics rap, was being reconsidered by the Supreme Court. Shandley summarized the contribution of Joe Valachi to the overall investigation.
356 names mentioned in this overall picture, and he has ranked these people with an apparent authenticity that's hard to doubt. Now, in addition to the specific information that he gave, this will be pursued. But even if this specific information doesn't pan out, it wouldn't necessarily detract from the effectiveness of the information, because the lapse of time, as you well know, goes for the defendant. And what happens in 10, 20, or 30 years is that the witness is not available, memories fade, locales change. In New York, some of the things this man is talking about no longer exist as a locale. The buildings are torn down. Physical evidence is gone.
And sometimes the physical witnesses are gone too. One of the myths attached to bodies is that if you split open the stomach, the body will never rise to the surface. It's not true. But dead is dead. It doesn't usually matter. Dead men can't testify. Witness unavailable. Witness unavailable. Witness unavailable. With witnesses unavailable or too frightened to speak, the mob maintains its underground status, its invisibility.
The appearance that organized crime gives is very deceptive. It's like an iceberg. Much of it is below the surface.
Valachi's testimony continued about the ins and outs of the garment racket.
I never belonged in any union, and if I got in trouble, any union organizer came around, all I had to do was call up Johnny Deal or Tommy Deal.
Nor did Valachi ever have to worry about shakedowns. As a made man in La Cosa Nostra, he was immune. His competition was not so lucky. And in the construction racket, well, maybe you'd better buy our cement. It's guaranteed to be waterproof. Or in the food business, buy our milk. It comes in bulletproof cans. Johnny Dio was obviously not too happy about having his name bandied about Washington, D.C. In the U.S. Capitol, in the Senate building, security was stepped up. Threats had been received, anonymously of course, that Valachi's testimony was over, whether anybody knew it or not. People were searched, frisked. Briefcases, camera cases, and purses were left outside. Valachi was clearly nervous.
I have to be very cautious in telling you this, Mr.
I'll refer to it as Mr. X or your friend or any other.
That wouldn't help, Mr. Edelman. Can we leave this for private? Remember, put this question on the side for me. I want to protect this person. It's very hard, X and
Valachi worries that he might be spilling too much. He confers with U.S. Marshals. Is he revealing too much about cases that are pending? Endangering people?
Can I ask you this? Were you asked to participate in this?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Now, without mentioning the name of the man that you want to protect, did you agree to participate?
Mr. Edelman, I'm not thinking of the question you gave me.
What's that?
I'm not thinking of the question you just asked me. That would also be incriminating. Let's put all of the questions for private. I'll answer you. I'll give you all of the details.
Would you rather tell it in your own way?
No, I'd rather talk it in private.
You want to talk in a private or what we call an executive session?
I'm trying to save other troubles.
All right, then we'll abandon this for the moment then. All right.
Surrounded by a platoon of security agents, Valachi left the Senate caucus room. He was visibly relieved, as were his guards. Nothing had happened that day. Detroit Police Commissioner George Edwards next took the oath and testified that an angry public and a responsible press helped clean up his city despite gruesome symbolic and not-so-subtle warnings not to speak.
Frank Gerlando, owner of Frankie G's Bar, discovered a dead pig placed against the rear door of his bar. The pig's front and hind legs were bound with rope, and its death had been caused by asphyxiation. In questioning witnesses, which we've done quite extensively, we have found that the message of the dead pig missed none of the associates of Roy Calabrese who happened to patronize that particular bar, which had been Roy's favorite hangout.
What did the message mean?
Squealers die. We believe that this conspiracy grosses an absolute minimum of $150 million a year in a variety of illegal enterprises in the Detroit area. We believe that these persons dominate gambling and narcotic traffic in the Detroit area.
$150 million in one city alone, an incalculable amount 30 years later. But people have always taken drugs of one sort or another, whether alcohol, opium, or variations on those themes. Recent scientific investigations at the University of California at Los Angeles indicate that attaining an altered state of consciousness, whether through alcohol, drugs, meditation, or any other means, seems to be one of the primary desires of the human condition. Getting high, getting loaded, being in another state seems to be as natural an escape as eating or sleeping. Yet in our society, we condemn it as evil and make it a crime. Gambling, too, has been with society since the dawn of time. Horse racing stems from the ancient days of the Roman Colosseum, where thousands of Romans would bet on their favorite chariots and horse races. Saliva tests in the 40s and 50s supposedly cleaned up horse racing and made it impossible to dope a horse. But decades later, someone came up with Butte. There'll always be a way to fix a race. And for every $2 bet at a parimutuel window, there's an untold amount wagered off-track. The numbers game, or policy game, is a racket directed at the poor who can least afford it. This raid on a big-time numbers joint in New York City closed the place down for a while, but for every gambling joint that's closed down, 2 more pop up. Illegal gambling joints and bingo parlors are available in almost any city in any state in the United States. It seems natural to want to play the ponies, the World Series, or the Super Bowl. Indeed, the point spread in professional football refers to the current odds on a given team, an acknowledgement that gambling is part of our society, whether the law permits it or not. So what is a crime fighter to do? Does he do like J. Edgar Hoover, ignore the whole situation, hope it goes away, never acknowledge the truth? Or does he do like the cop on the beat? Look at specifics. Look at the case at hand. Don't worry about the big picture. You've got enough problems right here. On this street corner, in this alley, on this freeway. It's easy to get cynical when you're confronted with crime and corruption and death every day of your life. But somehow the best cops stay with it, even though it'd be much easier to turn away, to ignore the obvious, to be cold and cynical. But when you remember there is definite right and wrong, and it's wrong to kill people and stuff them in car trunks. There are occasional people that'll come along and remind you of the right and wrong. Serpico of the NYPD, Robert Kennedy, who served as Attorney General under his brother.
His work with the Rackets Committee on which I served showed his intellectual energy, his courage, his integrity, and his organizing ability.
I am pleased to accept the position of the Attorney Generalship of the United States.
Whatever their faults, the Kennedy brothers were stopped in their crusade in midstream, running up against people like Santo Trafficante and Sam Giancana in Chicago. If suspicions many investigators have are true, Trafficante and Giancana were responsible for at least the death of John F. Kennedy and perhaps the death of Robert Kennedy 5 years later. If the suspicions are true, then the Kennedys joined the ranks of martyrs against crime that go back to the 1890s, when New Orleans Police Chief David Hennessy was murdered by the early Mafia. Do they still exist? Do mobsters still run the rackets? Yes and no. There are still crime families in almost every state of the Union, almost every city, and citizens tend to be indulgent of them. After all, rackets like gambling, prostitution, and drugs don't really hurt anyone, do they? Yes. Criminals like Jasper Campisi can hurt society in the gut. With so much money to spread around, the crime boss can corrupt even potentially good cops, like the former deputy sheriff of Cook County, under indictment for bribery. This undermines our own faith in government, and there can be only one government in a nation, a state, or a city. That must be an elected government, one that's accountable to its citizens, not paid for in drug money. It's a never-ending job. As long as there's big money to be made in the rackets, there'll be racketeers, Italian, Chinese, black, white. But there'll always be crusaders who try to make the laws better, harsher, or more sensible. And there will always be honest agents, detectives, and cops on the beat to make sure those laws are enforced.